Alright, so we're back on the E46 today, and full disclosure, I do enjoy a good Stancy Boy car. However, that is not quite what we got going on here today. So today we will be replacing our rear lower control arms, which on an E46 controls your camber. So let's get into it. For this job, I have more tools out than I need, but just want to show you guys a few different options. So obviously you'll need a jack and jack stands, and I always recommend, especially if you're working on a hill like me, to chalk those front wheels with either wood or a real chalk or whatever it is. So first thing you'll need to remove the wheels, you're going to need something to remove the wheels. So whatever you use for your lug nuts, for me it's a 17 millimeter and this impact wrench, and then obviously when you torque, make sure you have a torque wrench to torque to spec. The next thing that you're going to need is some sort of 18 millimeter wrench. You're going to need at least two of them, or you can also use an 18 millimeter socket to get to one of the nuts on the outward side of the control arm. Your choice. I'm going to most likely use a combination of an 18 millimeter wrench and an 18 millimeter socket, so I can just blast it off, but that's up to you. Gloves, because this is a pretty nasty job. And here is what remains of my control arm. So it basically sheared off on this side, which is on the knuckle side. And then this actually happened later where it just snapped in half when I was getting it off the trailer because it was stuck. And we're going to replace it with these pretty shiny, just so happen to be green, which matches kind of, I guess you could say, my color theme, from Max Speeding Rods. These are super El Cheapo control arms. They are made of steel. Some would argue that you want actually to run aluminum control arms. But basically, one of the big things is to realize is that the control arm on this car is supposed to be the main failure point. So this is an area where if you decide to cheap out, it's not the worst thing in the world, because it's supposed to fail before the rest of your suspension components so that it doesn't damage the knuckle and everything else when you do have something happen like what I had. For me, I went ahead and I've just purchased two. They're only 52 bucks for a pair. So for the cost of less than one of the other cheap brands, I have my ones that'll be on there and a backup. And I will say from personal experience, they last pretty long. So it's an area that I feel is okay to cheap out, but make your own decisions on that one. For funsies, here is where the control arm failed. So it sheared straight off of there and then was hanging down on the ground. And then up there, right there, is where the rest of the control arm is currently attached, and I'll have to take that out. We're going to replace both today. The process is the same for both. There's no difference side to side. So pretty simple process overall, as long as you have the right tools to get to these hard to reach areas. The first step is going to be to remove the wheel. We're going to need this off so that we can get access to the bolts for the control arm on the knuckle side. For those of you who this is one of your first car projects involving removing a wheel, it's a really simple thing, but I figure it's worth noting. You want to make sure that you remove the lug nuts in a star pattern going across from each other. This keeps the pressure on the hub even, and it prevents the chance of, or not prevents, but it lessens your chance of stripping any kind of threads or anything like that. One important thing that I forgot to talk about was these three tools right here. So you will need a 24 millimeter, a 27 millimeter wrench, and you'll need them both at the same time. So what I will typically do is use a pipe wrench and then the 27 millimeter. And what you're going to need those for is to adjust your control arms. So this nut is 27 millimeters, and then the flat spots beside it are 24. The next step we can do a number of different ways. You could either start with the knuckle side, or you could start on the chassis side. If you're going to start with the knuckle side like I am, then what you're going to need is an 18 millimeter wrench on the back side of the bolt, and then I'm going to use an impact gun on the front side of the bolt. In order to do that, I'm going to need to rotate this a little bit, which actually mine won't. If you had some sweet little Heim joints, you'd be able to. So actually, I'm going to have to change my strategy and go with a wrench 18 mil on each side. Theoretically, I could do the impact on this side, but just as a general rule of thumb, the impact is always going to go on the nut. You're always going to loosen and tighten from the nut rather than from the bolt head, because that gives you less chance of stripping things, over torquing things, etc., etc. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll move on to the next step. All right, another fun trick for you. If you have a situation like this one where the torque is really high, but you only have enough space to get a wrench in there, what we can do is increase the lever arm and basically turn our wrench into a breaker bar. So what you'll want is another wrench that is the same size or larger. And all you're going to do is turn it so it hooks onto the open end of the wrench. And then you have a nice long lever arm to break that free. So I'm going to get my wrenches switched out so that I have the right one on there and not the swivel head one. And then we'll get this thing free. All right, so I already got this one started. What I'm using is a flexible head ratcheting 18 millimeter wrench. I would highly recommend this for this job. If not, you could probably use a shallow socket on that and then get clearance, because there's a little lip, which I'll see if I can get the camera. You can see there's a little lip that doesn't, if you had a straight wrench, you'd run into it and you wouldn't have any clearance, and it'd be a very, very short little movement you're able to make. But with the flex head, it makes it a lot better. On this one, there's not actually a nut on the other side. Instead, you have kind of this this stopper right here, right, and it runs into the side here. So that will come off once you get done unscrewing it. That little piece is going to fall off. Let's see if I can't really see it from this side, but once you get done unscrewing it, there it is. That piece is liable to fall off. Just make sure you don't lose it, because you're going to need it to start the threading on when you put the new bolts in. All right, so I went ahead and I did the other side instead. And so real quick, I'm going to just touch on that. So that bolt, which is not there anymore, so in that hole right there is where control arm bolt comes out. It protrudes and it runs into this axle. So what you're going to have to do is loosen up these axle bolts, and you probably don't technically have to pull them all the way off, but it makes it a lot easier just to shift the axle out of the way. Then you can pull the bolt back, and then you can replace the axle just like that. So for that, you are going to need an E12 E12 E-Torx socket. So that is another tip for this side. All right, so we are almost to the end of swapping out this control arm here. But one thing you're going to want to do before you reinstall, so anytime you reinstall any suspension components that are broken, I highly recommend that what you do before you start your install is go ahead and line them up with the previous part and make sure that you adjust them so they're at least roughly the same length. This is going to save you a lot when it comes back to doing your alignment. And it's going to save you a lot of headache, and it's also going to make it go on there a whole lot easier. If it's not aligned right, then you're going to have to figure out a way to like push the arms around and fight the tension of the hub and all that, and is not a good time. So we're going to just go ahead and adjust this one so that it matches the length of the other one, so that our bolt holes all line up, and that should get us pretty close when we reinstall it. All right, so got it back in there now, nice and pretty. Pretty simple process. I went ahead and did the top one first. So you're gonna have the bolt. It's gonna go back through before you've put back on your axle. So bolt's gonna go through, and once you start to see it come out the other side,
you're going to have that little, I don't even know what to call it, a little wannabe nut right there. Just hold that on the other side so it starts getting threaded. That'll wedge itself right up against the side, and then you can thread that bolt the rest of the way through. I believe the torque spec for that is 44 foot-pounds, or no, 57 foot-pounds. After that, you can either move on to putting this one through on this end, and just make sure it's not super important on this because there's pretty decent clearance, but I have the bolt head toward the back of the car and I have the nut toward the front of the car, which gives me plenty clearance to put a torque wrench on this nut. And then lastly, make sure that you button up your uh, your axle bolts to the diff. And then after that, you are basically through. Put your wheel back on, torque all your lug nuts down, all that good stuff. All you'll do to adjust is loosen these nuts on the end. Make sure you loosen both nuts. Then Then in the middle, you're just going to turn this. One way is going to make it go out. The other way is going to make it go in. So you won't have to use your pipe wrench. You can just use your 27, loosen, 27, loosen, and then 24 and adjust. All right, that's all.
All right, so I finally got that other bolt out, and I'll take you through what you'll have to do. So what you're gonna need to do is put a jack underneath the back side of the diff. You're gonna need to unbolt the big diff bolt and take that out. That is going to be 21 millimeters on each side, and then on this side, the two front diff bolts, you don't actually have to take them all the way out. We just need to be able to shift the diff back and up. So these are 18 millimeter bolts. I would highly recommend not doing it the way I did it because I actually caused myself more work here. But what I would recommend doing is take this 18 millimeter bolt off of the brace. Then you'll also have two, I believe those are either 12 or 13 millimeter bolts. I think they're 13. And you'll have that on the other side. So remove the whole brace. Because what that'll allow you to do, it's going to take a lot of turns to get this 18 millimeter bolt to let you back the diff up enough. And so if you take that brace off, you can get a ratchet on there or something. Otherwise, you're left with just a box end wrench, and it's going to be a bazillion turns on that one and a bazillion turns on that one, and it's just a waste of time and energy. So basically, you need to loosen these two bolts up pretty significantly. Remove this, and then you're going to jack the diff up a little bit higher than what it would line up for with the bolt, and then make sure you push it back, and then that'll give you enough clearance to get the bolt that goes in here out, so you can get the head of that out. So we're gonna go ahead and get the other side and get this installed, and it's just like the other side. All right, so to wrap this video up, the arm is installed, everything's back in place. So for those torque specs, so basically all the 18 millimeter bolts, so I had to take this one off during my install, you may or may not. You got the bottom one down here, and then you got the one up in the back. All of those are 57 foot-pounds of torque. Your axle bolts are 61 foot-pounds of torque with that E12. And that's pretty much all the ones that you'll have to do. Oh, sorry, the diff bolts, the two front ones are 57 foot-pounds, and then this back one is 125, which I'll go ahead and say that with that 125 foot-pound, you don't really actually have space to get a torque wrench on it. So normally you would torque down at the nut. Your two options are to torque down on the opposite side of the bolt, which on a big bolt like that is probably not going to strip anything, or basically just use the two wrench method to give yourself a long lever and just pull till you can't pull anymore, and you should be good. One little pro tip that I will share is you'll see the paint that I have on this bolt right here. So anytime that you're working on suspension especially, but really anything in the car, I would recommend that if you torque something to spec, go ahead and mark the bolt and then the corresponding surface that it goes to, because it'll make it really easy in the future to go back and and see if the bolt has moved at all. So then you can bolt check just visually without really even having to go through and retorque anything, and see if things are still holding to the spec that they're supposed to. So that's it for the control arm install. I would actually say like the green looks pretty cool, and we'll see how that goes. Oh, one more torch spec here is this bolt right here in the back. If you do remove the back one of your lower shock, it is 74 foot-pounds of torque on that one. So hope this was helpful, and hopefully I won't have to be doing this again anytime soon, and I'll see y'all in the next video.